Awesome. Thanks, Brian, for having me over here. I'm really excited to present what I think is a slightly fresh view on this. And the more you for the audience, the more you watch this, the more you stick with me, the more fresh it's gonna get. Because towards the end, I'm going to be looking more and more towards the future in the end, and there are a few really interesting perspectives and takes on this that I wanted to share with you all. But let's start with who I am. People always start with this. So I'm just going to follow the crowd here. I'm a senior web developer. I mostly do Java, JavaScript, and Rails. More and more JavaScript these days, to be honest. So I don't remember the last time I touched Java actually. I'm a CEO at two companies. One is MintBean, and MintBean is a developer community full of full stack web developers. And I'm also CEO at Zero Projects, where I build software and do architecture consulting for other companies. I'm also a Star Trek fan, and I'm an overall geek. So if anybody wants to talk about the new Dune movie, I'm geeking out about it, and I'm looking forward to that. I'll be taking questions on all things Java, JavaScript, Rails, developer communities, software management, Star Trek, science fiction, anything y'all want, and of course backend development. So let's start with let's talk about developers, right? I want to start with the whole premise over here starts with developers. And it's really important to note that developers are a really high value audience. In 2019, there were almost 3 million programmers in the US. This is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And that's a lot of programmers. That's a lot of professionals working as coders in the US. And 57% of those people have purchasing power in their companies in some fashion or the other, which means they have a spend of at least $1. A lot of them have a much higher spend. And the median salary is about $91,000, give or take. It's growing at 22% per year, according to BLS. So obviously, very, very rich, very powerful. It's a very, very powerful segment. We don't often think about ourselves as powerful in software development, but we really are. We have about $264 billion of personal purchasing power in the US alone. That's probably bigger than the GDP of several countries, perhaps combined. We also have purchasing power in companies, like I mentioned before. So developers are extremely high value, and companies have not left this fact unnoticed. If you have any questions about this, if you wanna challenge me on any of the stats, I think the first number, the 2.9 million programmers, might be slightly off. It sounds a bit high to me. So if anybody's doing research in the back and doing fact checking, drop your comments, and I would love to go back and forth with you on this. But however you slice it, it is a powerful and rich audience. What does this mean? So yeah, they're rich. They buy tools for work, and they buy tools for personal projects. All of us have bought some sort of subscription or the other, be it GitHub's premium, or be it hosting for our personal projects. All of us as developers, we bought something or the other for personal projects, definitely, and maybe even for work. I've recommended many different subscription services to clients. I continue recommending subscription services to clients, like API access and various different infrastructure pieces like Amazon, or a database that sits on Amazon RDS, or DigitalOcean Droplet, whatever, whatever have you. So you might be asking, okay, well, what does this have to do with backend? Bear with me for a second, because this is important. Money is the lifeblood of our economy, as you all know. It's the primary impulse of companies. And I've assembled a list of acquired companies between 2018 and 2021, all of whom sell to developers, whether they sell to developers for both personal and professional projects, like GitHub, or if they only sell to developers for professional projects, doesn't matter. All of these are recent mergers and acquisitions. These are millions of dollars. So that GitHub is $7.5 billion, Auth0 is $6.5 billion, MuleSoft is $6.5 billion, and so on and so forth. Stack Overflow's recent acquisition of $1.8 billion also, just made the list. I just didn't add it to this yet. So developers clearly are targeted by companies, and they're targeted by serverless companies, definitely. So let's start getting into the trends. All four trends that I'm going to be talking about are commercial trends, and all four trends sell to developers. And that's a really interesting fact that we should keep in mind. So I'll go over the four trends really quickly. So there's serverless, there are API companies, there's CI/CD as a service, and there's the one-stop shop IaaS companies. And all four of those trends charge developers for providing a service to developers. And that's really interesting to note. I think this is probably the first time that commercial services are starting to eclipse open source as a source of value for the average developer. Commercial services have always been something that enterprise companies look at, something that medium-sized or small startups look at, just to quickly build something and get it out of the way. Let's just buy it instead of building it. But this is, I think, the first time in these past 10 years, this is the first time that we're actually able to provide key components of the stack to the average developer. Serverless is a massive example. And serverless doesn't mean there's no server. As you all know, what serverless means is somebody else is managing servers. And why would you manage your own servers when you can have somebody else manage them for you? It means there's scalability, there's secrets management. Everything is provided by the serverless provider. And examples of this are Netlify, Vercel, Amazon Lambda, and there are other ones that are coming up as well. Serverless is really cool. Serverless, for those of you who may not be fully familiar with serverless is kind of to infrastructure, to servers, to your Linux OS, your Ubuntu OS, or whatever OS you're running on your actual machine. It is to infrastructure what WordPress is to front end in a way. Serverless lets you use web UIs to manage your servers, essentially, and not just web UIs, but also code. But it gives you an abstracted away layer that manages all the low-level details for you, and that can glue together various different services for you in a way that you don't have to really worry about. Much like WordPress glues together the DOM and various different plugins for you in the front end, serverless does that for you on the server layer. And scalability becomes really easy because in many of these offerings like AWS Lambda, you don't actually have to worry about scalability because it's scalable by default, or so they claim. It definitely enables architecture that's scalable by default because it'll just spin up as many server instances as you need on demand, which is really cool from a backend developer's perspective, because now you don't have to worry about scaling issues, which is if anybody's ever been in a project that's been scaling, that has scaled, you know how painful that can be. You don't really have to do secrets management. That's kind of abstracted away as well in many ways. And more of these things are going to be managed by the serverless provider as we go ahead. And that has a really interesting implication about what skill sets are going to be valuable in the future. The core skill set of the developer has always been managing machines, and then only almost as an afterthought, creating value for the company. This trend, serverless, shifts away from actually managing machines and shifts towards writing logic and making business value. And the software engineer's job is more and more moving away from managing low-level details and more moving towards business logic and application development rather than managing invisible boxes in the sky. And I think this is going to be a massive trend going the next 5 or 10 years into the future. I think it's going to be a really massive trend. And I really wonder what this is going to mean for various different IaaS providers. There's more on that in the next couple of slides, but let's move on to the next topic, and I'll kind of circle back and synthesize all of these 4 trends together towards the end. The next trend over here is API companies. So API companies, I need no introduction. They provide various different capabilities through exposing, exposing a function or a service or data over a RESTful or otherwise API. And I'm not going to go into defining what an API is because I think everybody probably knows over here. But there are 2 types of APIs. So there are outward-facing APIs and there are inward-facing APIs. And inward-facing APIs are APIs that let you control a certain service, but do not give you anything extra they're not a building block, they're more like a remote control. For example, Shopify's API, the last time I checked last year, roughly, Shopify's API let you control your store using APIs, but they didn't really expose any valuable data from their large database of shops online that would let you search those shops or that would let you run reports on all of the shops out there. So they're really inward-facing APIs, and they don't really expose any data to you. Now, outward-facing APIs, that second sentence over here should say outward, not upward. Outward-facing APIs, they're different. Outward-facing APIs give you data and they give you value rather than allowing you to control a piece of machinery automatically. Outward-facing APIs offer a capacity that you didn't have before. And outward-facing APIs are, for example, any dataset-based APIs like the Twitter and Facebook APIs that let you search and filter through their dataset. That's a classic example of an API. You can tap into a large dataset just by using REST or GraphQL. That's awesome, and that's the classic example of APIs. I think the first APIs were dataset-based APIs. The second type of the other types of APIs that are coming out though are really interesting, and I've listed down a couple of examples of these APIs over here. One of them is I think slightly more interesting than the rest, which is OpenAI. OpenAI offers a bunch of AI capabilities, and this is an algorithm-based API where they expose an algorithm that they run on your data or data that you provided. Algolia is like that, where Algolia will expose search capabilities on your data set for you. So you feed Algolia a bunch of data, and Algolia will let you run really fast searches, Elasticsearch style or Solr style, on your data set. And Algolia is an example of a company that ingests your data and then creates a component around your data that you can then query, which is awesome because now you don't have to worry about building your own search. You don't have to worry about building your own fuzzy search, your own multi-search, multi-field search, your filters, your searches, none of that. Algolia will just do it for you. And it'll do it for you at a fraction of the price that you would pay a developer to build that piece of functionality for you. So search could take anywhere from half an hour to half a week to half a month to create. Developers, as I said before, are high value, they're expensive, and half a month of a dev's time is what $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 roughly speaking. Instead of spending all of that money, Algolia will let you do searches, will let you integrate with them. It takes about half an hour to an hour, maybe half a day to integrate with Algolia, maybe half a week to fully integrate with it and take full advantage of Algolia. And they charge you, practically, they charge you pennies a month. And they give you search capabilities. The unit economics of APIs that give you these kinds of capacities, they're just extremely attractive to most companies, extremely attractive, even for personal projects, where instead of building this thing that you want to build, like instead of building it yourself, you just integrate with a partner and you buy it instead of building it. It's really, really attractive, especially from a startup or a small business perspective. Why wouldn't you do that? Because it saves you time in addition to saving you money. Other examples of APIs that are changing the game over here and are adding to this trend that I'm going to be synthesizing for you and telling a story about are capability-based APIs. So Twilio will give you a capability that you never had before, which is SMS and video chat, and they acquired SendGrid, so email as well. So Twilio will let you integrate with their services and give you the ability to stream video on your platform. They'll give you the ability to send SMS to your customers. So these are also relatively familiar to most developers. But then you have these other types of APIs. They're not really even APIs anymore, like Mapbox. Mapbox will provide you a custom Google-style map that you can search, that you can put markers on, that you can mark up with GeoJSON, and you can build a really beautiful map using their capabilities. And they have a free tier, and then they have various paid options, and they give you the full UI right from, they serve you the full UI in your application. They give you components for it. They give you documentation on how to put their component really easily, embed that component onto your website or your app. And then they turn around and they give you this Photoshop style studio where you can actually style your maps. You can put colors on them. You can define what the theme of the map is going to be. Do you want it, red and blue? Do you want it black and white? Do you want it to be satellite imagery, or do you want it to be more abstract road style, like Google Maps style road data? Whatever you want, they'll give it to you. They'll whatever you want, whatever style of map you want, you can design it in a separate UI on Mapbox's platform, and that gets reflected immediately, instantly, on the embedded map that you have on your platform. So they give you a full studio. It's a beautiful solution, and then they give you the ability to integrate that solution into your platform and iterate on it without touching a single line of code. And that's really, really amazing. That's something that a developer would take forever to build, and Mapbox just gives it to you as part of their value offer. So the interesting thing about these outward-facing APIs is that they're composable. So let's say Mapbox. Let's take a look at Mapbox. Mapbox might offer. Actually, I want to build a more compelling case. Let's say you have you somehow get your hands on all of the property listings in your city, and all of the property listings, you have their historic data, you have the current listing price, you have information about the square footage of the house, of the lot. You decide to expose that data over an API. So you've created an API that takes all of this data and you expose it for, let's say, $20 a month. Anybody can come in and they can grab that property data from you. Maybe they can enter the address of a property in this hypothetical scenario, and your hypothetical startup will give them, for $20 a month, you'll give them all of the searches that they want, unlimited searches across your city. For any property, you can get square footage, you can get the current owner, you can get past owners, everything, past prices, everything. Somebody comes along and says, hey, it would be really cool if we could actually search all of your data in a UI. And I know you don't offer a UI because you're an API, but maybe you can offer a UI over here where we can search all of your data. You go away, you think about it, and you realize that it's going to take you half a month to a month to really build a solution like that. You don't have the UI engineer in-house that can help you build this. You don't have the expertise in-house. You'll have to hire for that. All in all, we're looking at months and months of effort in order to build a UI that many customers are now demanding from your solution. What do? maybe you go to Algolia and you say, hey, Algolia, let me take a look at your documentation. You read their docs, you understand their capabilities, and you decide that it would be really smart to go on Algolia's paid tier. Maybe it's 100 or 200 bucks a month, not much, but for that 100 or 200 bucks a month, you get full search capabilities, caching, really speedy, fast search, advanced filters, fuzzy search, all of that. You get all of that on Algolia for a couple $100 a month. And the integration time, your backend engineer tells you, yeah, we can spin up a simple HTML website, probably use jQuery, and we can integrate that with Algolia. Looks like our junior developer might be able to do that in a couple of weeks. Why wouldn't you take that option? Like, why wouldn't you? The rational actor would end up picking Algolia over building it in-house. The rational actor would do a full analysis of Algolia, see their capabilities, and use that to build to build this front-end web UI really fast, and do it at a fraction of a cost and a fraction of the time. So what just happened was you have a data set based API that's your first level at the very bottom over here, and you've gone ahead and you've composed it with Algolia, and now you're offering your own API, but you've composed it with Algolia, which serves as a thin layer on top of your API. So now you're actually selling Algolia's work as well as your own, and you're charging for Algolia's work. Maybe you're charging for UI access, or maybe you upped your price to make sure that you can make ends meet and pay Algolia. Maybe you've upped your margins because your service offering is so much better now. Either way, your customers are really happy. You're getting more customers in the door. Everybody's happy. Algolia wins because they gained a new customer in you, and you win because you gained many new customers thanks to your new capacity that Algolia enabled, thanks to your new UI that Algolia enabled. So you've composed your data in an API with Algolia. Now, let's say I come along and I want to build a map functionality on top of your API. I might hook into your newly enabled. Maybe you've integrated Algolia into a special GET request that you can search against your entire database. Algolia is now giving you search capabilities across your database, not just in the UI, but of course also on the API side. So I might come along and say, hey, I wanna build a new startup. I want to build a new startup that lets you visualize property prices across the United States or across the city. I realize that your business, your database, your dataset-based API that gives me access to historic pricing information across the city is a great starting point, and I want to integrate with you. I see that you're charging maybe $50 or $100 a month. That makes a lot of sense. Why would I want to go out there and make my own dataset if I could buy it off of you? So I sign up on a subscription basis with you, and I start building my UI. I realize that I don't really have the skills I need to build a GeoJSON style map on my own. I go to Mapbox. I buy Mapbox, and I integrate it into my solution to offer a really beautiful UI layer on top of your API that's Algolia enabled. So now what we have is you have your data that you're exposing over APIs that has Algolia as a thin layer, and then I'm putting Mapbox on top of those two layers. And now we have Algolia, and we have Mapbox, and we have your own API, all of them making money off of my startup. So these APIs compose. They compose really well, and they compose and create chains of value that can then be acquired by companies. A third-party company might buy me out and say, hey, Monarch, I want to buy your company for $50 million, whatever crazy amount, and I'm gonna pay you $50 million bucks. That's great. They're buying me, but they're also buying the subscription that I have with the property price API, which is paying Algolia for the search API. So there's chains and chains and chains of value that are now exchanging hands. It gets really cool because it almost looks like an ecosystem is being built, which is exactly what's happening. More on that later. Blank slide. There are a couple of trends over here that I want to talk about that are really similar, but they are also different. And I want to kind of talk about them in the context of each other. So CI/CD is, as you all know, continuous integration, continuous deployment. CI is the part that tests your code and builds it and tests it before allowing it to be merged. CD is continuous deployment that distributes your newly built and tested application across your network of nodes. So CI/CD goes together, and it's essentially task runners with event-based triggers. That's it. And of course deployment, a deployment endpoint. Oh well, one end of it is an event-based trigger. You push something up to GitHub or you press a button, the pipeline runs, and at the other end of it out pops a newly deployed application. So it's a build pipeline that's event-based. That itself is an abstraction, and it's an automation of stuff that used to be done manually and is still done manually by software engineers all the time. Like people used to test and deploy manually all the time. CI/CD came along and it put a stop to all of that. Now the machine will test it for you. As soon as you push a commit to your source code, it'll test it for you. That abstracted away a whole class of developers. That abstracted away a whole class of engineers who would deploy things manually, test things manually. What does that mean? Right? What does that mean? It means, yes, yet another type of developer got abstracted away. Great, you're not telling me anything new, Monarch. Why should I care? Well, the interesting thing about CI/CD is that the largest providers of CI/CD, Travis and Circle. I use Buddy CI, but there's Travis CI, Circle CI. They're paid services, and they charge about 60 or 70 bucks a month in order to give you CI/CD functionality that you can then configure yourself. But they'll handle your CI/CD pipeline for you. Yet another service that's being that backend developers are paying for, and that's affordable. If I wanted to go and set up Jenkins on an instance right now and go and configure it with this clunky UI, I would take so long and it would be so painful. I would first have to requisition a server, spin it up, get Jenkins going, set up my credentials. That takes about a day with Jenkins, in my experience, like half a day to a day. After you set up Jenkins, you want to go in and start configuring all of those pipelines. Jenkins' UI isn't that great, as everybody knows. It's notorious for its clunky UI, but it's a great tool. It's a great free open source tool. It's just that the amount of time that it takes to set Jenkins up is so high. The per hour labor cost of developers is about $50 an hour, roughly speaking. Why would I want to spend 4 to 5 hours, that's about $200, $300, and not work on something else that's more valuable? Why would I want to set up Jenkins and then have to configure it in the clunky UI if I could just pay somebody 75 bucks a month and they handle that for me? And they give me stuff that Jenkins doesn't give me, like code-based CI/CD definitions. Like you can define your CI/CD pipelines in code in Travis and Circle. And why wouldn't I want to pick that up? Why wouldn't I want to build? Why wouldn't I want to just pay somebody 75 bucks a month so they can handle all of this for me? Not to mention they're managing the server, which is the abstraction away of that low-level service. The CI/CD provider is managing the server for you, and that, again, now we're starting to see a theme over here where low-level stuff is being abstracted away and the developer is being charged a subscription fee in order to hook into this piece of value that you've created for them. So everything is turning into a SaaS platform, essentially, in the back end. And it's really exciting. It's a little scary, but it's also really exciting because that means I, as a developer, spend less time building stuff and less time doing the plumbing that I'm not really interested in and that's not valuable to me, and more time actually building business logic and creating value for my customers. Now let's talk about these large one-stop shop infrastructure as a service providers. So I'm talking about GCP, AWS, even DigitalOcean, although they have a more limited service offering. all of these, and I believe Alibaba is also in the game now. So all of these different players, they offer and have been offering for years many different services that they'll manage the server for, and all you have to do is click a couple of buttons, tell them what kind of configuration you want for your database, how many gigs of storage do you want, how many gigs of RAM do you want, what kind of CPU do you want. You configure all of this stuff, you press a button, and boom, it's deployed. If you want a load balancer, they'll requisition and deploy it for you at the click of a button. If you want to clone your instance, they'll do that for you as well. And this is all old hat. This is not a trend, but the synthesis of this with all of the other with all of the other trends is the interesting part that I'm trying to get to. It's all coming together as it's all coming together in this SaaS style service offering for backend developers and front-end developers that's abstracting away the low-level work, and it's making it easy for me to buy rather than build in-house. And I have a scary item over here called the downfall of the engineer ? And I want to talk about that, and I would love to have a dialogue about that. But depends on how many questions we get. I don't have any questions so far that I know of, but depends on how many questions we get. I can wax poetic about it, but we can talk about what this means for engineers. But this one-stop shop IaaS thing, let's elaborate on that a little bit. Infrastructure used to be a big box in your company's basement or on a floor, or not just one big box. It used to be a whole floor of boxes that ENIAC style, 1940s big mainframe style boxes that did all the hard work using. You would have to plug it into your wall, and it would suck up your. It would contribute to your electric bill, and you actually had to manage the damn thing. We've moved past that, and we've abstracted that away into the cloud. Now, the cloud itself is being abstracted away into serverless, and more of these infrastructure providers are offering serverless functions like Lambda. Not only are they offering Lambda-style functions, but other companies are building their own Lambda functions on top of infrastructure as a service. And then third parties are then building their applications and their APIs on top of on top of those secondary Lambda service like Netlify and Vercel, I believe, are on top of AWS. Don't quote me on that, but they very well could be. And then people are building they're building layers and layers and layers and layers on top of SaaS monthly subscription fees, and it's creating all these really interesting value chains. And I'm gonna get into that in possibly the next slide. Before I do that, let's talk about open source. So what's the future of open source? I don't know, is the honest answer. Jenkins is open source. Jenkins is free, going back to CI/CD. Jenkins is free. I would never use Jenkins in my life ever again. I would avoid it like the plague if I could help it. And not only because of the clunky UI, but also because of the fact that I have to manage my own server and I have to deploy it on a server. So open source solutions, I don't think they're going away, but they're definitely becoming less and less relevant and less useful to the end user. I'm a full stack developer. I'm going to kind of give an example of what I'm seeing from another industry, game development. In game development, you used to have to build your rendering engine yourself. You could buy one, but you would then have to write your algorithms yourself for pathfinding. You would have to make your code yourself, and you would probably use a bunch of open source components. Along comes Unity. The whole thing is commercial. I know there's an open source core to it, but most of it is commercial. You can buy plugins for it, you can buy assets for it, and a whole ecosystem of commercial services has sprung up around the Unity engine. And the Unity engine makes it so that game developers are no longer coding their UI. They're just dragging and dropping components onto their UI, onto the map or onto the 3D map, whatever you have. And it's a tool set that's commercial and that offers capabilities that game developers didn't have before. Could something like that happen in the front end in web development? I don't see a fundamental reason why not. I know that people are going to talk about Dreamweaver. We've all been we've all been bitten by Dreamweaver, and we're burnt by it, and we don't want to go there as an industry. But if a commercial solution arose that charged you $99 or $150 or $200 a month to give you the IDE and the framework you need to have a full React style application that's just drag and drop, why wouldn't you buy that? In the backend, it's the same thing in the backend. Why wouldn't you buy something that gave you a commercial solution that had the support of engineers, that had the support of software developers who were working for that company and were fixing bugs and improving the platform for you, always updating it and giving you more and more functionality for more and more bang for your buck over time? Why wouldn't you buy a solution like that and buy into it fully? Why wouldn't you rely on the professionals to do their jobs rather than going to the community and picking up something that's community built? Because in my experience, these commercial solutions are so far ahead of any open source solution out there in terms of practical value that I really see the role of open source diminishing over time and becoming more and more specialized in certain areas and use cases. I feel that open source's time is not done. In fact, it might still flourish as a result of this vast ecosystem of paid subscription services that's coming up. I feel like open source might actually flourish, but I feel like its role is going to change and it's going to be less mainstay and more support or low-level building block in the future. But who knows? We'll see where that goes. People have been talking about the death of open source forever. I'm not going to add to that chorus of voices because I actually love open source and I don't want to see it die. But I think it's definitely going to change. So this is the slide that I really wanted to elaborate on. I think I have another 15 minutes or so, maybe a bit more. Let's talk about the big picture, and you guys can read the points over here, but I want you guys to just listen to the sound of my voice telling you a story. And the story I want to tell you is the story of the hammer. Back in yonder years, the blacksmiths who made horseshoes for armies and who made armor and swords and weapons and nails and various different pots and pans, whatever, blacksmiths, they would have to learn how to make their own hammer. And the only option they had for making a hammer was you had to forge it yourself or borrow one or get one from somebody else who's a friend of yours. But the default go-to for blacksmiths was you had to make your own hammer. Same thing for all of their tools. You had to make your own tongs. You had to make everything had to be made yourself. It was really hard to go out there and buy a really good hammer because a skilled blacksmith would probably make a better hammer that's suited for themselves than the hammers that were available in the 1000s or the 1200s. Fast forward a little bit, and these blacksmiths, yes, they were making hammers, but they were those hammers were very inconsistent in quality. They were not always, one hammer was never the same as another hammer. They might be built off of the same blueprint or the same formula or recipe or shape or whatever you want to call it. They would more or less look the same, but they weren't really the same hammer. Your hammer would be different from my hammer because your hammer would be built by you, my hammer would be built by me. So there was no consistency. The quality of hammers depended largely on the skill of the blacksmith. And that was back when metallurgy and metalworking were metalworking was a cottage industry back then. Division of labor came in, and some really smart people started making hammers in a factory. And inside the factory, they decided that they would make the best hammer possible and sell it for a profit. They started competing. Most blacksmiths didn't really want to buy the hammer that came out of this factory because they just wanted to build their own hammer. They were used to it. They were used to doing it that way. There was a sense of pride around making your own hammer and making the best hammer you possibly could, so that there was a sense of a craftsman's pride. What happened after a few decades or possibly centuries of specialized factories making hammers, probably decades, what happened was these factories got so good at making that hammer that the hammer they made was by far superior to all the hammers that any blacksmith made, regardless of their skill. The hammers that were made in these factories benefited from consistency of process. They benefited from consistency of raw materials. They benefited from a continuous improvement on process and in purchasing practices, continuous improvement in research. These factories could actually do deep research on metals, and they could hire really smart people to make better and better hammers. And because of division of labor and because of economies of scale, buying a hammer from a factory was also way cheaper than making a hammer yourself. Maybe you would take half a day or a day to make a hammer yourself, but the hammer you could buy from the factory, you just go across the street, buy the hammer, and that's way cheaper than making it yourself in terms of time, in terms of investment. It just made sense to go buy a hammer, and the hammers were also higher quality. So what happened was blacksmiths stopped making their own hammers, and they started buying hammers from these factories. Over time, of course, the blacksmiths themselves got obsolete, and these factories started making more and more items in a more systematic way, where they would hire experts and they would hire labor to build these components, to build these tools, to build these components that would then be used in secondary industries. And that same dynamic is currently happening in software development. The same dynamic where the developer would previously build tools, and the developer, even now, the developer would build these tools themselves. They would create these components themselves. They would, you would manage your own server. You manage your own database. You create your own database schemas. You write your own conventions for code in the backend. You do integrations yourself. All of this is starting to get replaced by commercial players who will give you everything that you can do and more at a lower cost than you can do it yourself. So Auth0, they let you have up to 7,000 monthly active users with full authentication hooked up to OAuth. They give you Google authentication. You can sign in with Google. You can sign in with LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub. I think they have 100 or 200 authentication partners now for OAuth. They give you password reset. They give you forgot password capabilities, all of that for free for up to 7,000 monthly users. And then they start charging you once you've reached 7,000 monthly active users. That's ridiculous. Why wouldn't you use OAuth? Why wouldn't you use Auth0? Why? Why would you build your own authentication? That can take days or weeks. I mean, if you're in Rails and you're using a gem, you're still depending on something like Devise that you would have to configure yourself and maintain yourself, and there could be bugs and you have to constantly update it. Instead, Auth0 just says, nope, no need to do that. Just use our SDK. We're professionals. We're going to manage that ourselves. You just use our authentication and you're going to be just fine. It's free. Don't worry about it. Mind blown. Why would you ever want to do Auth yourself? And this is happening across the board. It's happening with Auth. It's happening with infrastructure. It's happening with CI/CD. It has happened with CI/CD. And this trend is accelerating. And there's an ecosystem of paid services that are affordable for the average developer and that are no-brainers to purchase. And what this is creating is an ecosystem of first, second, third level consumers where all of these services are being composed one on top of the other. So API A is built on top of API B, is built on top of API C, is built on top of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all working together. And developers in those companies are going to be better at whatever that API specializes in than anybody you can hire. A developer who's in Auth0 specializing in Auth, just doing Auth, an architect who's in Auth0 is going to be better at Auth than pretty much anybody you can hire. And that is a game changer, because now you're looking at specialized developers who just deal with building authentication systems like locksmiths almost. And that division of labor, it is division of labor in the purest sense, because you're outsourcing, you're letting somebody else build Auth for you, and you're buying that from them. That's division of labor. That's pure division of labor, where they're specializing in doing something really, really well so that you can then build on top of that. What this increased convenience also comes with a lower barrier to entry. And the big picture over here is that boot camps that until today have been a little, they've been in that phase of people don't really know what to do with them until now. And this year they've really come into their own. Boot camps are now churning out developers that are better fit for their environment than universities are. What I mean by that, and I know that's a large claim, but I have numbers to back that up. Last year, there were 78,000 programming students, be that software engineering or computer science, that graduated from bachelor's degrees in universities last year. So that was 78,000. The year before that, there were 70,000. That's about a 10% increase year over year. Meanwhile, boot camps, they've been growing way faster. In 2019, there were only 20,000 bootcamp graduates. In 2020, there are 33,000 bootcamp graduates. And in 2021, that's a 70% increase. If that holds, 2021, we're going to see about 55,000 bootcamp graduates. Next year, they're going to overtake universities. And the year after that, they're going to leave them behind in the dust. Yes, employers are hiring from boot camps. They sport a 60 to 95% placement rate in the first year after graduation. The median, in my experience, is guesstimating being about 80%, 85%. And these developers didn't know coding 12 weeks before they ended the program, before they graduated. They didn't know coding at all. And now they have enough skills to go and build web applications or backend applications. And because there's a simultaneous trend of SaaS companies, these APIs and serverless companies coming up simultaneously, there's this resonance effect happening where these API companies are being picked up by these bootcamp graduates way faster than the university graduate will ever pick them up, because the university graduate has been taught to build stuff a certain way, in a traditional way. But the bootcamp graduate has been taught industry-relevant skills, and they're actually, in my experience, bootcamp graduates have way more relevant skills than these university graduates have at this point. It's also now more feasible for companies to hire bootcamp graduates because of this lower barrier to entry that comes from the convenience coming from all of these division of labor companies, APIs and serverless. What does all this mean? I think what it means is that software development is going to become a very democratic industry. I think in the next 50 years, coding is going to become something we're going to get closer and closer to that dream of everybody can code. I don't think we'll ever get there fully, but I think we're going to get there more and more, because coding is going to be so powerful for so little effort. You can just pick up a little bit of JavaScript, integrate with Algolia, and then you have full search. Integrate with Mapbox, you have full mapping capabilities with just a smattering of JavaScript. That's going to change the unit economics of software development forever, and that's gonna change the unit economics of education in tech forever. So there's a massive sea change coming. It's completely invisible. Nobody's talking about it. I don't know why. You're hearing it here first. This is really exciting stuff, and I really think that there's going to be a massive sea change in the next decade. That the first four backend trends combined with bootcamps is going to change how we look at software development forever in the next 10 years. we can talk about more philosophical stuff now. Are we living in the singularity? Is it coming? Are we all going to get eaten by Skynet? If anybody's familiar with the technium hypothesis, that would be an interesting thing to talk about right now as well, because these new companies and these new technologies, they're composing on each other in a very biological way. It almost looks like first level producers like grass, and second level consumers like cows, and third level consumers like tigers. Like it's really starting to feel like there is a more fluid way of organization that's coming out of all of this, that more closely resembles biology than it resembles business or technology. All of these API companies are composing with each other. They're composing on top of each other, and there's to say nothing of YouTube's algorithms that'll tell you stuff that you didn't even know you wanted to hear. Yeah, I can also take just regular old questions about, hey, okay, well, what does this mean? What are these 4 API trends, et cetera, et cetera?
All right. Well, I didn't have any questions that were posted in the chat yet, but I have some stuff I mean, you covered a lot of ground there. I think one of the things I really like is the way you tie it to like a thought of a business way of thinking, as opposed to, like, as developers, we often are just focused on, like, oh, this is cool and the code is cool, and not really thinking about, like, oh, what is the cost of say building something versus the cost of buying something, and so on. And funny enough, I know this wasn't a Jamstack presentation, but you basically gave, like, all of those things about those back-end services and buying versus building and so on is kind of a fundamental tenet of the whole Jamstack philosophy. I mean, it's kind of, that's what makes that possible. Like, I add my authentication with Auth0 and my search with Algolia and my content with a headless CMS. And each of those is very distinct in its in what it's trying to do for me. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's I think that is all of those things kind of coming together, as you mentioned, to kind of make that a possible architecture.
It's a really weird place to be, isn't it, as a software developer, because it feels less like architecture now, and it feels more like you're buying a host of subscription services. And it kind of feels messy to me as a purebred software developer, but yeah, as a business owner, it feels magical. It's like, yeah, whoa, can you do that?
I mean, I've been doing this for so long that, like, I mean, I've built all those things myself. And I could tell you that even the ones that I did my best at are still not as good and aren't as, you know, kind of well refined as any of these solutions that I now just kind of integrate. Like, I don't ever want to have to build auth again. It's awful to have to build it, and it's easy to mess up. So, you know, as a developer, I'm more than grateful to, like, pass that off. And I mean, I've built decent search before, but, like, I can't compete with what Algolia gives me right out of the box, honestly, without putting a ton of effort into it. So I agree with you. It makes total sense.
Well, you know, you can't compete with it, and your business can't compete with the other business who decided to adopt that tech. So what happens is your business ends up having less appealing features and ends up being not as attractive to your customers because, oh, you don't have that advanced search capability that the other businesses have. Like, everybody has it, you don't. So it's actually, not only is it better to buy it from an economic point of view, but it's also, you have to buy it now because the genie's out of the bottle and it's granting everybody their wishes. And if you don't, you know, get on that bandwagon, your home-baked solution for search is just not going to be as good as the genie solution for search. So what are you going to do?
And you saved the lead till the very end, because I think your comments about boot camps were really interesting in that, and kind of not something you hear people saying often. I know, like I brought up in communities that I'm a part of, sometimes as soon as somebody starts talking about boot camps, it becomes a big debate, about the value of boot camps. But I think that in many ways that you have a good point about the division of labor and the skill set that they bring. I think where the struggle has been is employers are often the ones who, like I've found, are hesitant to hop on, even though when they do, like where I live, for instance, they're all looking for senior developers or mid-level to senior developers, and they'll tell me, like, I've been looking for a senior developer for a year, and I can't find anybody. And I'm like, well, I mean, have you tried maybe looking at some of the junior developers out there? We have a lot of them, and you could train them. They're like, no, that would take too long.
Well, unless you change your architecture and you outsource this stuff to somebody else, and then you can have those junior developers work on business logic. So yeah.
But also they spent a year looking for somebody and still haven't found it. You can imagine this junior developer would now have a year of experience, right? If you'd just done that a year ago, and be ready, they'd be rolling already. So I think, but having that pipeline internally at a lot of companies is tough. They don't feel like they have the expertise to train somebody. I don't know what it is, but I do think that there's a lot, at least in my area. I mean, there's a lot of talent out there who are coming out of these boot camps who just underutilized at the moment.
So you already know this, but I've been working with bootcamp talent for the last year, and we have 4,000 people on our newsletter. We have 3,000 people roughly on our Discord, 3,000 across our social media, and at MintBean, and a lot of them are bootcamp developers, and I talk to a lot of them. I see the same distribution in bootcamp devs as I do in university undergrads. My neighbor's dog has that too, and I have to close my window. It's cool.
Those are my dogs.
What I was saying was the talent gap is the same in university grads as it is in bootcamp grads on average. Unless you're going to like a top tier university like Waterloo or MIT or whatever, then you're going to get way better talent. But if you're looking at the average university versus the average bootcamp, I would rather hire from a bootcamp at this point. I would have to filter and vet and search, but the bootcamps are just as good as your average undergrad. Now, the difference between junior and senior and intermediate, you have a point there, but that's just, if we don't hire junior developers now, we're not going to have enough senior developers 5 years from now. So what do we do as an industry?
Yep, I agree with you totally.